that I do a show there at 2 o'clock this afternoon, local time. So a little after 2, I'll be there and I'll talk more about this. But just for a quick answer, I think this is really a historic change. First of all, that you even have 3 qualified candidates. I mean, they've all been bankers and political cronies and war criminals that have run the World Bank for the past, 60-something years. And so this is really something. To have someone like Kim, for example, as the U.S. choice is really amazing. I mean, this is somebody who spent his whole life trying to help poor people in developing countries and really help them, and not the way the World Bank helps them. And he fought within the World Health Organization tenaciously to get HIV and AIDS treatment to 3 million people. And I think he'll fight for those kinds of things inside the bank. So that would be, I'd be quite happy with him. I mean, Jose Antonio Ocampo is also very good. He is not the U.S. choice, so he probably won't get there this time. I think this is probably the last one they're going to get. I think next year, next 5 years from now, the developing countries will get together and they'll say, we want an end to this rule that an American runs the World Bank and a European runs the IMF. Now, having said that, if it's just a symbolic change, it won't do much good. In fact, last time, Mexico put up Carstens, their central bank governor for the IMF, and Brazil and everybody else supported Christine Lagarde from France because she was better. I mean, he is really right-wing. And again, if it only becomes, all you get is a right-wing person from a developing country, that won't be progress. But this time we're going to get somebody good. And that is, now, you raised an important point, how much difference can they make? That's the hard part, because you still have a board of directors, and that's where the U.S. has something like 60% of the vote, and they don't even bother to vote because the U.S. and the Europeans almost always agree. I mean, really almost always, like once in 50 years they fight. And so he will have to fight. And that's where I kind of wish we had somebody with a big mouth that was going to get that job, because you need to use that. If they had a president who was willing to go to the public and it wasn't that easy to fire, which they wouldn't fire them very easily, you'd probably get more. And so it really depends what they do, how hard they're going to fight, what they're going to do. I think they'll make some change. But the fundamental problem is that the developing countries don't do in the World Bank what they do, or the IMF, what they do in the World Trade Organization, where they have blocs, they have coalitions, they fight for what they perceive at least as their national interest, or what the leadership perceives as their national interest, and sometimes is. And you don't see that in the IMF or the World Bank, and that's why those are still run by the United States Treasury Department. And by the way, primarily, okay, I'll let it go there. That's too long an answer already. Go ahead.
I was wondering if you had any insight as to why the United States healthcare costs are so high as compared to the other countries that you were talking about.
Yes. Well, the simple story is that we have a dysfunctional system that's run by private insurance companies, and so they're trying to insure the healthy and avoid paying for the sick, and that has very high administrative costs, and then the sick get treated by the federal government anyway. So most of them, some of them don't, so it's really different from the other systems that you see in Europe or even Canada. Canada, of course, has a universal single-payer healthcare system, and we can see just from the cost of Medicare or any place else you want to look that those systems are much more efficient. So it really is just the domination of our system by private insurance, and I should add pharmaceutical companies, which also cost us an extra couple $100 billion a year from monopoly pricing.
I have a question which maybe sounds simple, but who are the they that you're speaking about exactly? Where are the politics coming from in Europe that is determining what's happening with their economic policies.
Yeah.
Germany, and who else is, why does Germany have that much power?
Well, okay. The standard explanation that you see in the press of the Eurozone, there's two of them. One of why they can't seem to get it together and get out of this recession. One of them is that it's the Germans. And they're all, they're still suffering from that inflation monster scare that they had 80 years ago when they had hyperinflation. And they have a public who won't support further bailouts for so-called bailouts. I don't really call them bailouts because they're not really bailing them out, they're throwing them overboard. And the second explanation you hear is that you don't have a common fiscal policy. And so, like you have in the United States, you have a national fiscal policy. You don't have that in Europe. I think there's a little bit of truth to both of those explanations, but only a little. So, in other words, in Germany, yeah, you have a public that's wary of inflation, that sees, you have some people who believe the stereotypes that they read in the tabloids. The Greeks are lazy and they're getting too much money and blah, blah. They don't work enough. And in fact, they work longer hours and retire later than Germans do. But I don't think that's really driving it because, first of all, the European, as I spent most of the time here trying to explain, I think the European Central Bank can take care of the problem without having to put the governments to put up any money at all. They can do what the Federal Reserve did here, which is create money. Bernanke's a Republican, okay? He's not a radical. So they could do that. And would the German people revolt at the ballot box if the ECB created money and the European economy started growing again? I don't really believe that story, especially if it were explained to them correctly instead of the politicians trying to say all the time, like Merkel does, we're doing this because we have to, and and we don't like it, and the Greeks have to do their part too and squeeze their economy more, and that kind of stuff. They're giving the wrong narrative, even from the politicians that are supporting doing something. So I don't really believe that. So who are the real interests? Well, obviously you have the financial sector. And they have an interest in squeezing as much debt as they can out of the peripheral countries. But again, that explanation doesn't work completely because they would have been better off back in May of 2010 taking a small haircut in Greece and resolving the whole thing than what they're ending up with now and what they've already ended up with. So clearly there's an element of stupidity and ideology here as well. And you certainly had that with Trichet at the prior head of the central bank until late last year. He was crazy, in my opinion. He stood up in the middle of the worst financial crisis that Europe had had in half a century and said that y'all should be happy with our job at the central bank because we have kept inflation under 2% for the last 10 years. And, I didn't even get into it here, but, there's nothing particularly appealing